Good morning, everyone. We hope you're all doing well and that you've already had your breakfast. Maybe you had rice with egg, or if you're health conscious, perhaps some fruits too. Now, where did you put the eggshells? What about the fruit peelings? Did you just throw them away? So, these questions are connected to our topic for today. It's something many of you might already be familiar with. Maybe you've done a composting project in school, or maybe you've tried making your own organic fertilizer at home if you have a backyard. So, in this presentation, we'll explore the different types of fertilizers, some that support plant growth and protect the environment, and others that can be harmful. So, just to give you a quick preview of our findings, we discovered that a sustainable approach to agricultural production in the country involves a science based strategy, one that uses both organic and inorganic fertilizers, depending on what the soil needs in order to nourish plants effectively. And this is what we call the balanced fertilization strategy, and we'll be learning more about it shortly. I'm Ivory, and I'll begin the discussion by covering the background of our study, why we're undertaking it, our methodology, the relevant government policies and programs. After that, Helena will take over to discuss the science behind organic agriculture, as she's our team's agri scientist. And finally, Dr. Briones, our agricultural economics expert, will synthesize our findings and deliver the concluding remarks. So we know that modern conventional agriculture heavily relies on chemical fertilizers to achieve higher crop yields in order to meet the food demands of a growing global population. However, there is an increasing concern about the sustainability of this approach due to its detrimental ecological and economic impacts. Remember in 2021 and 2022, when the price of inorganic fertilizers surged to as much as 3,000 pesos per sack, and that's triple the usual price. This prompted renewed interest in alternatives such as nature based farming and the use of organic based fertilizers. In response, the government implemented measures to safeguard food security, primarily by providing subsidies to farmers, and these subsidies were mostly used to purchase inorganic fertilizers. So, a key policy issue here is how the government can strike a balance between ensuring short term food security, promoting long term sustainable farming practices, and while keeping public spending under control. So, our study aims to rapidly assess the current state and potential for expanding organic fertilizer use in the Philippines. And we explore key policy questions such as how widely are organic fertilizers used, and what drives or hinders adoption, what is the supply potential, and how affordable and available are these fertilizers. What are the prospects for wider use among farmers? And what government programs, policies, and directions are shaping this landscape? Now let's discuss some key trends. Crop and fertilizer use have grown sharply since 1961. On the left hand panel, we see rice, maize, and banana production surge multiple times, while fertilizer use on the right hand side, namely nitrogen, phosphate, and potash, rose over fivefold. So in this slide, we see that the most commonly applied inorganic fertilizers are nitrogenous and complete fertilizers. Interestingly, many farmers still use organic based fertilizers, and according to a 2022 survey, 37% apply organic fertilizers. As for our methodology, we use a demand supply framework to study organic fertilizer adoption. Demand is driven by expected farm benefits, while supply varies by scale, that's individual, community, or commercial scale. The producers weigh costs against private and environmental benefits, with government policies like subsidies and extension services helping to balance these trade offs. Now, we used a rapid appraisal approach through desk reviews and interviews with key stakeholders, mainly the producers and government agencies at various levels. And to find organic fertilizer producers, who are usually also the users, we compiled a list of farmer organizations from DA and other agencies, then focused on areas in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao with the most number of farmer organizations. So LGUs willing to help us were asked to reach out to these groups, including those using organic only, inorganic only, or both organic and inorganic fertilizers. So for commercial producers, we contacted companies near NCR and Region 4A using the lists from FPA and UPLB. So, before discussing the programs related to fertilizers, let's just review some concepts. So, using too much chemical fertilizer in conventional farming can damage the soil over time, making it less healthy and productive. It leads to problems like loss of nutrients, salt buildup, and fewer helpful microbes in the soil. And due to the disadvantages of inorganic fertilizers, various alternative farming systems have emerged. Examples are agroecology, organic farming, and integrated nutrient management, which focus on sustainability and soil health using fewer external inputs. These systems rely on organic fertilizers, which improve soil quality and provide slow, steady nutrient release. The integrated nutrient management, or INM, combines both organic and inorganic fertilizers to improve crop yields while maintaining soil health and minimizing environmental impact. Although effective, the INM requires site specific recommendations and regular monitoring, which can make adoption more challenging for farmers, especially smallholder farmers. Now let's talk about the policies. The fertilizer industry has been regulated since the 1970s, with the latest landmark legislation being the Organic Agriculture Act of 2010. The Agriculture Act of 2010 promotes a farming that improves soil fertility, reduces pollution, and avoids synthetic fertilizers. And since it was passed in 2010, certified organic farm area remains small. But we see that there's been a big jump, 8 times more, in the production of organic soil amendments from 2012 to 2022. Now, there are two DA agencies in charge of fertilizer regulation. So, the BAFS, or the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards, sets organic standards under the Philippine national standards and accredits organic certification bodies. So, the Memorandum Circular Number 10, Series of 2023, places organic soil amendments and biocontrol agents under the jurisdiction of BAFS. On the other hand, the FPA oversees chemical based fertilizers. However, the memorandum circular does not cover biofertilizers, which are fertilizers not labeled as organic, and thus they remain under the FPA's regulation. With RA 11511, the Organic Agriculture Act Amendment, the problem on high certification costs was addressed through PGS, or the Participatory Guarantee System. It allows smallholders to get certified through a community based process. The Department of Agriculture promotes organic and balanced fertilization through two key programs: the National Organic Agriculture Program, or NOAP, and the Balanced Fertilization Strategy, or BFS. The NOAP supports the promotion and commercialization of organic farming, including composting facilities for smallholders and LGUs. It is overseen by the National Organic Agriculture Board, with BAFS as the lead implementing agency. The Balanced Fertilization Strategy, or BFS, on the other hand, encourages a science based, site specific mix of organic and inorganic fertilizers to improve soil health and crop yields. It is implemented through the National Rice Program. Since 2023, the program's fertilizer voucher provides 1,500 pesos per hectare for biofertilizers or microbial inoculants out of a total allocation of 5,500 pesos per hectare to promote more sustainable fertilization practices in rice production. And that's it for me. I now turn you over to Helena.
Uh, Thank you to Ms. Ivory for providing us with the background of our study. So, okay. So for the second part of our discussion, we now turn to the topic of shifting to organic agriculture. So can organic agriculture feed the Philippines? Well, we believe no study has been done to conclusively answer the question based on the availability of organic sources in the Philippines. So while organic agriculture can improve net income, it faces constraints on sourcing materials and labor. We consulted with experts from UPLB led by Dr. Edna Aguilar to do some calculations on organic materials and the required NPK, or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium quantities as shown on the table on the left. So these are plant nutrient imports and the required matching NPK quantities from the different organic sources in 2023 in tons. So the limiting factor for each source is nitrogen, with swine manure requiring the lowest quantity at 37.6 million tons due to its already high nitrogen content. On the other hand, we see that dried cocoa husk requires 2.15 billion tons, a very large amount compared to the other organic sources. So these calculations do not even take into account the differences in mineralization rates. And looking at the local supply of organic materials, unfortunately, po, it is inadequate to fully shift to organic agriculture. As you can see on the table on the right, this shows the total organic nitrogen available from these organic materials, and it only equates to 0.49%. So this means that these organic materials simply cannot deliver the same amount of nitrogen as compared to imported inorganic fertilizers in 2023. So the less than 1% total available nitrogen is not enough to be solely used for farming, much more for other uses, because locally produced organic materials are already being utilized in agriculture, animal feeds, and other industrial uses. Next slide, please. So what's the alternative for this? And now we turn to the benefits of shifting to integrated nutrient management. So not only is the FPA, the DA, and other government agencies recommend the balanced fertilization strategy through integrated nutrient management, here we also have some studies on INM saying that it can address the increasing cost of inorganic fertilizers and other environmental concerns. So the first study in upland corn in Inapacan Leyte shows that INM can enhance soil quality and increase crop yields with the use of combined organic fertilizers. In the study, they used chicken dung and vermicast with inorganic fertilizers. The second study by Phil Rice found that the use of inorganic fertilizers, biofertilizers, and biostimulants generated the highest net income in both the dry and wet season at 79,000 and 58,000 pesos per hectare, respectively. And finally, the practice of a site-specific nutrient management in cabbage production show that understanding the different farmers' practices enable them to build their own tactical knowledge, which can promote sustainable farming practices and reduce environmental impact. So this was actually true for the farmers we interviewed because some of them preferred to use only inorganic fertilizers, some only prefer to use purely organic fertilizers, while some use a combination of these fertilizers based on the availability of organic materials and inorganic fertilizers in their local communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are these types of organic fertilizers? Here we have some definitions of the types of these organic-based fertilizers from the Philippine National Standards for Organic Soil Amendments by BAFS, or the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards. So organic fertilizers come in either solid or liquid forms from fully decomposed plant or animal materials. So the keyword here is fully decomposed. Another is the soil conditioner or soil amendments like biochar, which has been gaining traction in the field of alternatives to conventional farming. Also, we have organic plant supplements, which many of the farmers we interviewed use for their own household farms. Examples of this are fermented plant and fruit juices, which they themselves produce using plant and fruit materials that they collect. We'll also have fish amino acid, vermi and vermicompost. So all of these organic-based fertilizers need to adhere to the regulations set by BAPS to ensure quality and safe production, regardless of its scale. So even if it's at the individual or large scale, um, all farmers need to adhere to these strict guidelines. So some considerations to this include the maturity of the compost. So this means that the compost has to have a fine texture, dark color, and an earthy smell. The proper CN ratio suitable for decomposition should also be considered. It also has to be pathogen free and lastly, fully decomposed. So a practical way to check the decomposition of an organic material, we have been advised by Dr. Manix Pedro from Biotech UPLB to check the MC or the moisture content by taking a handful and squeezing it with a handful of the substrate and squeezing it with a hard grip. So if there's the water that drips down, then the material has too much water and needs to undergo further decomposition. So next slide, please. Here we have the classification of biostimulants. So for the interest of time, we will not be discussing the technical definitions of each biostimulant, but biostimulants are natural substances or helpful microbes that when applied to plants or soil, it helps plants grow better by using nutrients more efficiently, handle stress, and improve the overall quality. So good examples of these are Trichoderma and BioN, developed by UPLB researchers Dr. Virginia Cuevas and Dr. Mercedes Garcia, which are microbial inoculants. So there are a variety of organic-based fertilizers that farmers can choose from based on their preferences, available materials, and of course, the cost and labor of collecting these materials. So that's it for me in the discussion. Let me now give the floor to Dr. Briones for the synthesis of our findings.
Thanks, Helena. Helena, by the way, is a licensed agriculturist. So if asked officially, maybe I should say that Helena is the lead investigator here, so that I will not run afoul of the New Republic Act 12215. I'm just being naughty. This is a big discussion in agricultural policy in the past couple of weeks. Anyway, returning to this topic. So we earlier Ivory had talked about the supply and the demand, right? So and then Helena has basically talked a little bit about the supply side. Here are now the demand side implications, or looking at the potential sources of demand. So a major source of demand for organic-based fertilizers are actually the organic growers themselves who are being promoted under the NOAA. And they apply a large variety. So when we went around doing our rapid appraisal, yeah, actually there's a very large variety. Vermicompost is a common one, but there are also many others. Collecting carabao droppings, collecting chicken manure, and so on. Now, many of these organic growers, when we asked them, they said, well, it was not immediate, but most of them said they're able to replicate or even improve upon the yields obtained under conventional farming. However, in fact, despite this, when asked about whether a lot of farmers are switching to organic farming, they say no. There's just a small, narrow market segment in many localities that have actually been convinced and have adopted organic farming. Next. So other demand sources, maybe if that's too weak, maybe even conventional farmers who are moving to a more balanced fertilization strategy, they could potentially be a source of demand. So among major temporary crops, farmers tend to rely mostly or entirely on organic fertilizers. So the rice and the corn, uh, we didn't really see a lot, at least if you look at the national statistics, still mostly chemical fertilizers. The exception among temporary crops is vegetable farming. Now, it's not fully organic, but we see an adoption, considerable adoption of combination of both application of manure, mostly chicken manure, in fact, and regular fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. Now, when we do see rice, corn, and other temporary crops applying these organic-based fertilizers, it's normally because there's a nearby source. So, sugarcane farms, they would apply cakes, no, excess waste materials from a nearby sugarcane mill. But if they're very far away, then they still rely 100% on inorganic fertilizer. The exception we found was corn farmers in Bicol. Despite wide distances from the nearby chicken farm, they still spend, because they say chemical fertilizers simply don't work in the volcanic soils of Bicol region, at least in terms of growing corn. Now, commercial organic fertilizers, so organic or biofertilizers, they are applied, but often when they are provided for free by government. So that's another impetus for the demand, no? So the significant market for fertilizer producers is government itself. So the government procures organic-based fertilizers and then distributes it as part of its fertilizer subsidy scheme. Now, when we went around, it turns out that rather than if you listen to agricultural courses, they will have a very scientific way of doing this integrated nutrient management. But if you look at the actual farmers' practice, it's based mostly on tradition. So they have a traditional way of combining chemical, say among vegetable farmers, chemical fertilizer and chicken manure, and then they have their own notion of what is the correct ratio given their soil, and that's what they do rather than going through soil analysis and a more precisely formulated combination for their BFS, balanced fertilization strategy. Next. So where does the supply come from? Organic growers are actively producing their own fertilizers. So this is the farm and household production. Commercial production is a little bit less common, although we have observed cooperatives and micro enterprises in rural areas engaged in the production. So, for instance, they do a fairly sizable vermicomposting activity, and then the excess vermicompost and vermicast they sell off, no, to other farmers. Now, there are more sophisticated products, such as microbial inoculants made by small and medium enterprises, and even a few large companies. Recently, a bio-N microbial inoculant has opened in Laguna, and it's producing at quite a significant scale, no? The ASI Corporation. So these large-scale operations are, of course, able to take advantage of economies of scale. No? When you have a large plant, that's a high investment cost. And unless you have a large output to sell, then it doesn't pay to make that investment. Next. Now, moving on to our assessment based on rapid appraisal of the policies and programs. So we did observe, even the community level, that the NOAP focuses on dissemination of organic farming, livelihood support for those who want to make a switch to organic farming, as well as the push for community-based certification, because the government wants to promote an organically labeled, genuine, authentic, organically labeled within its own laws, no, not necessarily the organic label using those high-tech certification with very strict standards, but based on its PGS system. But government is also actively promoting BFS, the Balanced Fertilization Strategy, through input support and extension service. Although, in fact, when you talk to most extension workers, say in LGUs, they're still highly focused on inorganic fertilizers, on chemical fertilizers. Now, one issue that has hounded these biofertilizers and that space is issues of regulation and competition. So some stakeholders have expressed, frankly, I don't know if FPA is listening here, some frustrations in getting the hurdling the regulatory requirements of the FPA. And previously, before the PGS, there were also misgivings about the BAF's organic certification standards. But the PGS has actually relieved a lot of that. And also, in the issue of procurement, we were told that it's not clear that there was a real competition in being able to supply government. Uh, so I have no scientific assessment of this, but this is what the stakeholders have communicated. Next. So let us sort of move on into the conclusion by summarizing some key applications or key observations. Now, nutrient application in Philippine agriculture admittedly still dominated by chemical fertilizers, although we found out that organic-based fertilizer, not necessarily the technical organic fertilizer, but at least, organic-based fertilizers is actually quite common. The Philippines does have a large supply potential for these types of fertilizers. Although this should not be overestimated, because a limiting factor is availability of the crop residues, of the livestock wastes, as well as the cost of gathering and collecting these raw materials. Policies and programs have tried to support BFS and organic agriculture, but in fact, if you look at the bulk of the budget allocation, it's still heavily skewed in favor of inorganic chemical fertilizers. Next. So based on this, what do we imply for government policy? We recommend strengthening the National Organic Agricultural Program by expanding, rolling out more actively the implementation of PGS, so greater budgetary and programmatic support, as well as aggressively rolling out organic labeling. So dapat magkasabay yung dalawang yan eh. In fact, that's the reason why we want to carve out a market segment that consumers can bank on as being organically certified even under the PGS scheme. Now, one drawback of the PGS scheme is that this is not internationally recognized as organic. But first, we should grow our own domestic market, right? And then we can possibly think of the overseas market. We also need, as a second implication, to review the regulatory system and competition oversight for organic fertilizers, especially the companies, the large companies in the space of provision of organic fertilizers and even of inorganic fertilizers. So there's also, I should have probably also mentioned that there's a bias in favor of inorganic fertilizers, largely because of the lobbying and campaigning of these chemical fertilizer companies. Now, I kept harping on the large inorganic fertilizer subsidy. I would recommend, or our study recommends, phased repurposing of the fertilizer subsidy. So maybe not completely terminate the fertilizer subsidy, although there are many arguments actually in favor of terminating such subsidies. No, why is the taxpayer being asked to fund the provision of private goods? But rather than completely terminate it, why don't we repurpose it towards a kind of fertilizer product that is more amenable to long-term sustainability, soil health, and human health. So repurposing that towards organic fertilizers and biofertilizers. Part of the repurposing is not merely, more subsidies, so vouchers to farmers or free giveaways to farmers, but rather the funds from the subsidy could be made available for area-based research and development and extension to promote adaptive BFS, because there's a lot of site-specific nutrient management that needs to be undertaken in order to realistically adopt this all over the country. This will also entail mapping the soils of all the land in the country. We were astounded to realize that the last time we mapped soils, I think, was about the time I was born, the 70s. And we don't have an updated, comprehensive soil map of the country. We do have soil maps related to various commodity programs in selected areas. So we encountered provinces where they claimed to have a soil map, then it turns out the soil map was limited to corn growing areas, because that particular province got an allocation from the National Corn Program. So you have, basically, you have patches of profiled soils where they're growing corn. But what we need is the entire province, right? All of the agricultural land in that province, or in fact, of the entire country, being well profiled systematically and comprehensively in terms of crop suitability, types of soil, soil health, and all of these other related parameters. Then we can more aggressively roll out this SSNM and INM related strategy. Next. So, okay, so I already mentioned about extension. On the supply side of organic-based fertilizers, there should be a value chain program. So, because the industry is a whole thing. It's not just the production of the fertilizer. It's about packaging it and distributing it to farmers. And it starts from the sourcing of raw materials. So that entire value chain, that needs to be promoted under an integrated value chain program for biofertilizers and the organic fertilizer industry. So we can anchor that program on support for commercial networks of private corporations, but not necessarily just private corporations, capacitated farmer organizations who are willing to make investments, as well as coordinated with the distribution of organic fertilizer and biofertilizer vouchers. So it's the entire chain. Even government can leverage its subsidies, at least a part of its subsidies, to create markets for these emerging infant industry, for the biofertilizer and organic fertilizer market. And it will do well to have a value chain program looking at the entirety from the raw material to the demand. Now, talking about raw materials, that value chain development must also exist side by side with the development of a livestock, poultry, and agro-processing industry, because these are the sources of raw materials, right? So for instance, when you locate a organic fertilizer plant, you may want to cluster it near, say, agglomerations of livestock producers. And in fact, in the private sector, we have seen a few examples of this in Batangas. So this is kind of thing that government would probably like to scope out and study and review and assess for its own potential investment of public sector funds. So I believe that is our last slide. Yes, thank you again for listening.